Okay, there we go. Yeah, so welcome. Oh, and Erin, you have the same link I sent you, Erin. So if anyone has anyone yet trying to log in, it's that. I wonder if I still have it. There we go. There's the link. Okay, so yeah, thank you guys that are online right now and welcome. I saw we just had another addition. Hello, Peter. So we do only have a couple online tonight, so we'll let you guys be a little more active participants as far as using your mics if you're interested, which is kind of nice. Otherwise, you can always type questions at any time. So for those of you I haven't gotten to meet in person or via our webinars last year, my name is Natasha Johnson. I'm with the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic. We started offering these webinars last year for coaches across Atlantic Canada, and we're finding they're a lot of fun. We're getting to meet a lot of new coaches through it, so I really appreciate you guys joining us. Tonight's is the first one of this season, so we try to run them from the fall until we'll be running them until our Atlantic Coaching Conference in April. So welcome to the first online webinar of our season. If you missed Erin's webinar in the spring, she ran a basic nutrition, sports nutrition webinar for us in the spring, and it was really awesome. And we heard from some of the coaches that they wanted to do a little more of a deep dive, which is where tonight's webinar came from. So the other great thing is for you guys listening tonight, if you have any specific questions, definitely ask Erin tonight. But if afterward you're thinking, I really could use another hour on a certain portion of this topic, we can certainly do that and plan another webinar and get you guys the information you're looking for. So we welcome feedback. We want these to be shaped by our coaches. So I find that really exciting. So I'd like to welcome Erin tonight. So again, Erin ran the webinar for us in the spring, and Erin is a professional dietitian and was on our staff with the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic until just a couple months ago. She actually had a baby. I think it's four months ago. You said, Erin. So she has a little one at home.
Five today, actually.
5. Okay, I was going to say it seems longer than 4, but yeah, so 5, and it's been a very fast 5 months since Erin's temporarily left us, I guess. And Erin also happened to move to Quebec, so we were very sad. She had her little one, stepped away, and then ended up moving. So we're very thankful that thanks to technology, we can still access her expertise for our coaches tonight via this webinar. So welcome to Erin, and I really look forward to hearing tonight's kind of deep dive. Also, I can share this presentation with you guys in PDF afterwards, so don't feel you have to take crazy notes, and it is being recorded. Take it away, Erin.
Thanks, Natasha. Just let me know how my volume is doing, if it is at all shoddy. But thanks for welcoming me. I'm really happy to be back doing this. Welcome to anyone that's new tonight, and also to anyone that might have been on the first part in April. Like Natasha said, I was with the Sports Center, and sadly, I did have to leave and relocate. But I'm very happy to have the chance to kind of still work with her, I guess, like she said, through the means of technology. But I'll get rolling here. So during the first webinar, which I won't spend too much time overviewing, we kind of chatted about a few things. So for anyone that had missed the first one, I was just going to do just a couple minutes of a run through. Hopefully you weren't able to check out the recording, um, but we'll just go through that quickly. Then what I want to get into is eating for competition. So I know the season's just starting for coaches and athletes now, but that's where we're going to pick up from the first webinar. Since we did talk about what to do in training, we'll talk about competition and kind of sort of merge throughout the webinar. I'll sort of highlight how coaches can help athletes. I don't necessarily have any set slides on, the ABCs on what to do, but hopefully through the information I give you, you'll be able to relay that to your athletes and have some ideas on how you can help implement good eating habits and help them through the training season and leading into competition. Then we'll look at travel nutrition. That's often a challenging thing for athletes and coaches where you are with them during those times. I think that's a great opportunity to be able to really shape some of those habits or help direct them, I guess, in the towards a better path when you're traveling, whether it's locally or time zones away, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, I guess time permitted, I thought we would do just a few minutes on supplements, but that one will be left to the end in case we're able to touch on that. If anyone is really interested, then I will definitely try to get to that. So maybe you can just let me know in the chat box if we're running out of time and you really did want to see some of that information. So we'll get started. What we saw in the first webinar, we can go to the next slide there, Natasha. Oh, there we go. Perfect. We looked at meeting energy demand. So basically, we just wanted to make sure that coaches understood, and for parents, if any parents were actually on the webinar as well, that athletes just need more than their general counterparts, so their friends in school or whatnot. So their demands are quite a bit higher given the amount of training and everything that they're doing in the run of the day and the run of the season. So just understanding that those needs are higher and how they can meet those by eating frequently through the day was really important. Quality nutrition, which I will highlight as well throughout the presentation tonight, is obviously key. So we do see it's not uncommon for coaches and other team staff to see athletes choosing things that might not be to their benefit throughout the training season and potentially even leading into competition, or sometimes they completely change their habits and eat really well through competition. So we'll kind of chat about the challenges of that and how we can steer them in the right direction. And we looked at the macronutrients, so basic protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and what they do for the body. So proteins as our rebuilders, really important in recovery, maintaining lean muscle mass, work for connective tissue, looking at carbohydrates as the main fuel for the body, for muscles, and for the brain. So making sure that athletes, depending on what sport, whether endurance or their strength and power, that they have adequate stores of carbohydrates and they know when to utilize them. And then having fats as a well-rounded diet and looking at the healthy kinds of fats and the unhealthier kinds, and how athletes should what to watch out for. And we'll talk about that leading into travel nutrition as well, because that can be a culprit in when we get traveling with athletes. We looked at fueling for training, so what they need to eat pre-training, what they might need to eat during, depending on the sport, or what their training consists of in that particular session, and then what they should be covering with and when. I do have the slides from the first presentation up in this one as well, because that won't really change in and around competition. So for anyone that had missed that first webinar, you will see some of those slides so that you'll have that information. And then we talked about the importance of hydration and what consequences of having dehydrated athletes can do for the performance. So that was a quick rundown of what we did in April. So, that's interesting, Natasha. That shouldn't be the next slide. All right, there we go. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, that's perfect. So this is sort of the I guess scope of sports dietitians area, and kind of what we look at in terms of helping athletes build on their nutrition practices. So what I talked about in April, and we'll always come back to, I guess, in any presentation that I do for coaches and our athletes, is talking about functional nutrition for health and well-being, because it's my analogy is sort of like building that house. If you don't have a solid foundation, you're not going to be able to go up and have a strong house. So we need to always look at what our athletes are putting in their mouths and making sure that they have the best quality nutrition throughout the entire season leading into competition. Performance nutrition, so that's how much, how often, when, and what. So again, touched a little bit about that in part one, and we'll look at that again tonight. So it does get a bit sciencey, but hopefully I'll bring some practical application to that and how you can bring that back to your athletes as well. And then what I tell athletes is sort of that the supplements are really just that cherry on top. So we know that there are ergogenic aids out there that certainly can help performance, and they're very based on evidence. But ultimately, they come very last in an athlete's nutrition plan, because we need to make sure everything below that is really well set up. So I want to get into talking about fueling for competition. So we looked at, so really a big I guess a few of the differences that I want to highlight when we look at training, nutrition, and looking at periodized nutrition plans, which that's sort of our area. So sports dietitians will help athletes build training plans that are based on various phases of training. So it really isn't the same thing for every phase of training, but what we all ultimately come back to with all athletes is just having a really well-rounded quality diet with enough of the good food. So that never changes through any phase of training. Energy needs are usually much higher, really for any sport and any type of athlete. So if you think about how much training you're putting your athletes through in the run of the season, leading up to competition time, depending on the sport, if it's endurance, then they'll have a long day or they may have tournaments. But if you're working with sprint athletes in whatever capacity, their moments to shine in competition are often very, very short. We're looking at 30 seconds to 3 minutes or things like that. So in competition for those athletes, their energy needs generally do taper off a lot closer to competition. So we need to make sure that our athletes are fueled really well during the season. And like I said, they need to focus on high quality the whole time. They can't just hope to move into competition having kind of thought about their nutrition or not really having a plan, kind of eating what they want. And, we're dealing with adolescents a lot of the time, or I think that's what your group of athletes is for an age group. And we also know what their eating habits look like. So we want to make sure that they're building that solid foundation of their house till they get to that moment in the competition season. So I know a challenge I often found with athletes they would talk about was tournament settings and travel. Those are really two really big ones. So not only how their needs change in competition, but how do you eat well when you're traveling, you're not sure where you're going, or things are different. How do you fuel yourself for an event? You may only have one competition to run a day, and it might be as short as a minute, or you might be running a marathon. So how do you fuel differently for that time versus training? So you need to have a nutrition plan put in place. So that's where dietitians come into play, but certainly coaches and parents can have a really positive influence on what that plan can be based around. Then you look at sports foods, looking at fast-acting fuel. That actually becomes important. So quality nutrition certainly comes through whole foods, and I'm a strong believer in getting the most out of that. But there are times where convenient foods, whether it's sports drinks or sports gels, energy bars, things like that, really do come into play, and they definitely have a place in an athlete's nutrition plan. Okay, so big goals for competition. For a few of them I mentioned, but the biggest one would be really ensuring adequate glycogen stores. So building up that carbohydrate stores, because that's where we're going to get that energy from in our athletes. So making sure that, again, like I said, they have a good plan in place in training, but looking at maybe a week out, then looking at a couple days before, and even in the 1 to 4 hours before that specific event, that your athlete is fueling properly and that they're getting enough of the right carbohydrates. We want to make sure that athletes are not trying new foods. They're not being adventurous. They want to have a plan in place and have tried it already. So whether you have mock competitions or just trying it in training, they need to know that the snacks that they're having or the meals that they're having leading up to an event is something that's tolerable by them. So their gastrointestinal system is able to handle that and they feel comfortable, they feel fueled. They don't want to be underfueled or they don't want to be overloaded. So we need physical comfort as well as mental comfort going into competition. You want to make sure that your athletes are adequately recovering. So checking in with them, verbally at whatever time in the training or in the competition leading up to, checking in with them and seeing what their plan is and what they plan to bring. Keeping an eye out that they have these recovery foods and that they're taking them at the right time is really important, especially if we're getting into two-a-day events or they have weekend-long tournaments. They need to make sure that they're recovering after each one so that they're set up for optimal success for the next event or next game. We want to make sure that we're reducing time to fatigue. So again, making sure they have enough in the time leading up to, but if they have time to eat during, so if it's a longer endurance event, having that plan in place so that they're able to fuel during is really important so that they're not getting too gassed too early and then making sure that they're managing their hydration. So we're not looking at injury, injury risk or impaired performance or anything like that. So making sure that they're definitely hydrated well. So what do we want to look at, in the weeks, leading up to? The biggest focus tonight, I'm really going to focus on carbohydrates. That's where, like I said, we get that energy from. So that's the name of the game with athletes. So that's one thing you should be talking to them about is, are they getting it from the right places? So we want to make sure that they have a great balance. Protein often gets a really strong rap. Athletes think they need lots and lots of that. It's not necessarily wrong. They definitely need adequate protein, but carbohydrates are where they're going to get that energy from, and obviously more for longer events. So throughout you'll see some numbers. Don't worry too much about the numbers. These are the nitty gritties that sports dietitians use when we're doing nutrition plans with athletes, but I like to throw them up, and so there might be some relevance to some of you if you've seen them before, or you might be able to just sort of judge, how much or how little of each of those macronutrients they actually need. So it's more for just for reference. But we want to look at 7 to 12 grams per kilogram. So everyone is different. That's the other thing. It's not just everyone needs, 200 grams a day or whatever. So it really is individual depending on the athlete. So they want to make sure they have a good amount of carbs leading up to. I find the plate method is really great for athletes. That visual is great for coaches as well. You can say, leading up to, if athletes are wondering, how much should I be eating? What do I need to do? Get your plate, third of it, or even half of it. If you have an athlete that's doing more of an endurance sport, you might be looking at half to 3/4 of their plate actually being grains and starches or other types of carbohydrates. So fruit in there would be great as well. And then tell them that they need about a quarter protein and a quarter vegetables or whatnot. So giving them that visual can be really an easy way for them to balance that meal or meals leading into competition. Protein, the big thing here is making sure that they're evenly distributing it throughout the day. So they're not just having, say, a couple of chicken breasts with dinner. So they're having protein at breakfast. They're having a little bit with each of their snacks, whether it's before training or before the competition or after, and making sure that that's spaced throughout the day. And then a little bit of fat as well. And that will taper as we get closer to competition, mostly for gastrointestinal comfort. It takes longer to digest fat, so we're going to be focusing a lot on carbohydrates. Okay. So now I want to talk about more acute fueling strategies. So we're getting closer to competition time. If you have an endurance athlete, this would be most appropriate. So carbohydrate loading, that can be really useful when you're dealing with athletes that are looking at longer than an hour and a half of sustained or intermittent exercise. So it could be a soccer game, but we're definitely thinking of like long distance runners and some of the other longer endurance sports. What they eat for carbohydrates definitely is important. So in a couple days before, it's actually going to jump a bit. So we might be looking at 10 to 12 grams per kilogram body weight. So it's more than the general fueling strategy that you saw on the previous slide. But we want to make sure that even though it's still quality carbohydrates at this time, your athletes understand that there is an appropriate time for some more of the simple carbohydrates. So things that are lower in fiber and more easily digested is important. So having something like white pasta or a baked white potato or a white bagel might actually not be a bad idea a couple days leading up to or a couple hours before the event, because that's not going to take a whole lot of time to digest. The fiber's not going to sit in their stomach and make them feel uncomfortable. So having that knowledge, and so your athlete can understand that there is a place for those foods sometimes, I think is a good piece of information to have. Sorry, you may hear a baby crying in the background. I don't know if she's going to stay settled all night, just as a heads up for everybody. Sorry, where was I? But yeah, there are certain times that some more of those simple carbohydrates could have a role. But outside of that time, it's definitely best to reiterate in your athletes that quality carbohydrates, things with fiber, and good vitamins and minerals is really important. So fruits, whole wheats, and whole grain cereals and breads, oatmeal, sweet potatoes, things like that are all really great, and definitely have a place, just maybe further outside of competition, or unless an athlete has tried them in training and feels very comfortable with things that are a little bit more fibrous, then that's absolutely fine too. Okay, so that's a bit on carbohydrate loading. We're getting closer to pre-event fueling, so we're looking at 1 to 4 hours out. What should you be seeing your athletes eat, or what should they be talking about that they're fueling with? Again, focusing at this point on carbohydrates. Again, the closer we get to that competition or that event, the more we want to rely on carbohydrates. Further away, so if it's say 4 hours out and it's say they're having breakfast, they can have a more of a balanced meal. So include carbohydrates, but they can have some protein and they can have a little bit of fat. The closer we get to, the more we want to keep that protein and fat and fiber on the lower end. And again, it's just to do with gastrointestinal comfort, but it is individual. So some athletes, if they've tried it and they can handle things that are higher in protein before competition, then power to them. But just as a whole, we find that things that are a bit more carbohydrate dense are more easily tolerated by athletes, and then give them that burst of energy before they're going to go and compete. So, so I have the number of sort of 1 to 4 grams per kilogram. What does that look like? So I used an example of a 60 kilogram athlete. So depending on how far out of the event they are, they might need 60 to 240 grams leading up to that event. So in the box here, you'll see some examples. So what is 60 grams? What does that mean to anybody? So if you know your athlete's roughly around that weight, maybe they need a bagel and a half a banana about an hour before their competition, and that should be a sufficient amount of carbohydrates to fuel them. Certainly, we want to look at hydration too. We'll get to that, but right now I just have the carbohydrate to focus on. A little bit more, maybe they need 70 or 80 grams. Maybe they just have a cup of cereal with some milk, some sliced strawberries on top. Maybe they're someone that has they get nervous a bit more. Maybe they need a bit more fluid carbohydrate. So looking at 2 cups of Gatorade and maybe a breakfast bar is all they need. If we're further out, at the bottom I have something like a burrito. So if we're going with just a whole wheat wrap, they can have a little bit more. Again, you'll see some more fiber and fat in there. But if we're doing that 4 hours out, that gives us enough time for the athlete to digest most of that. But again, things like that should be tried in training before the big day. Okay, so I do have that slide too at the end was Natasha, I'm just going to flip back really quickly here. At the bottom I had low GI. So GI stands for the glycemic index. Foods might provide more sustained energy for events where carbs cannot be consumed throughout. So if you have an endurance athlete that's running with cross country, or they're a marathon runner, or they're playing a soccer game and they need something that's going to sustain them a little longer, because 2 cups of Gatorade might not hold them very long, but they don't have an opportunity to stop and fuel for more than a few seconds, they may want to look at some energy that's going to last them a bit longer. So low GI foods, for anyone that's not really familiar with, the glycemic index, it's just a scale used to rate the increase in blood glucose about a couple hours after consuming a portion of food containing a certain amount of carbohydrates, when we compare that to a standard food like white bread or glucose. So low GI foods, there's a scale that have a rating of below 55, and here's some examples. Sorry. Yeah, perfect. There's some examples there. So need to memorize anything, but when we're looking at low GI foods, again, that's more of our whole grains, things with a little bit more fiber, but they have a good amount of starch and they're not going to spike that blood glucose. So the athlete will have more sustained energy over a longer period of time if they're ingesting some of these a few hours out before a competition. Medium GI foods or high GI foods might be more appropriate right before a competition for short sprint athletes, or athletes that are able to have breaks in between. They have time to sub, or they don't have much time in between events. So there's just some examples. So all grain cereal, quinoa, sweet potatoes. You can see a bit more of the fibrous foods on the left on the low GI. So medium Medium would be okay too and could provide a decent amount of energy over a longer period of time as well. Perfect, thank you. So when we're looking at quick refueling, less than 8 hours recovery between two games or events. So whether it's two a day or they have an event in the evening and then first thing the next morning, and there's not a whole lot of time between events. What are our athletes? How are they fueling? Are they eating too much? Are they not eating enough so that second event they're not performing quite as well in? So we want to make sure that they're continuously recovering for that time. I mean, unless they're asleep, then obviously that's different. But if it's in the daytime, which likely would be if it's less than 8 hours, then they will be looking at pretty much snacking all the way up until their next event. So it doesn't have to be much. We're looking at 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram per hour for about the first 4 hours, and then they can resume daily energy needs. So if they have a snack for the first 3 to 4 hours, then they may have time for another snack 2 hours before, or if they want a bit of a bigger meal at that 4 hour period, and then a top up right before, then that's what they can plan for. So again, speaking to your athlete about making sure that they have the recovery food, but having enough of it as well. So you want them, you can say, I want to see you snacking every hour. Just needs to be a little bit, like I said, again, an example could be that medium bagel, just half banana, a cup of cereal. Maybe they're just having some rice with some beans, a little bit of salsa, something a little different. Could be simple like fruit source bars and a sports drink. So, getting back to that sport convenient type of food. Maybe it's a booster and onshore. So those nutrition supplement drinks are actually really convenient for athletes because they provide them with a good amount of carbohydrates and a bit of protein, which is great for that refueling and recovery piece because you get that protein in there as well, and then a piece on the fruit on the side. So thinking of quick things that your athletes can have on the go, so things that they should probably pack with them depending on where that competition is. Things depending on the venue, it might be hard to get at to make sure that they're achieving these carbohydrate needs, every hour. So having your athletes make this plan in advance, depending on what that competition schedule is really, really important. Okay, so and depending on the time of event, if it's in the morning, afternoon, or evening, it can be kind of confusing for athletes and coaches to know sort of, well, where do they eat most of their food or what should they have when, depending on when they're actually going to compete. And it will depend on the athlete to some degree, especially for morning events, because certain athletes might not be comfortable eating too much when they first wake up before an event. So it's good to know that they might not need to have a good, a whole breakfast, something really big. So reassuring them that as long as they've had a really good setup the night before, so maybe they just had a really good day before because they didn't have any events. They had a good meal the night before. Their plate had that. You had that visual plate of a third to one half at least carbohydrates. Then you can reassure them that in the morning they just need a little bit of top up of fuel. So a light snack, again focusing on the carbs, familiar foods, and fluid. I don't know if there's necessarily any sort of best or worst food out there necessarily, but I think I'm just giving generalizations on probably the I don't want to say best, but the right types of foods. So again, looking at whole foods, carbohydrates, rich sources of protein, keeping things like I said, the fat and protein to a minimum if you're getting too close to competition, just for comfort. If we're looking at an afternoon event, it would be good to encourage your athletes to have a full breakfast and lunch. So it's not going to be a good idea to skip a meal. Looking at, again, the same thing, focusing on good sources of carbohydrates. Because breakfast will be further away from that afternoon event, they can have a much more of a balanced plate at that point. So looking at protein sources. So at that point, you probably might want to, and I think I have a couple of slides further on, is looking at steering away from the processed breakfast meats. So that's probably not where they want to be going for the protein sources, but looking at things like yogurts, milk, dairy products, maybe even some nuts if they're having like oatmeal or something like that, they could sprinkle some nuts on top. So looking at things like that. Eggs would be a great protein source in the morning, or if they could do very unconventional things and have a chicken breast, depending on your athlete. I've seen some bizarre things in in athletes' nutrition plans, but it's really whatever they feel comfortable with. So that breakfast can be a good, well-rounded meal, and then lunch probably on the lighter side with your protein fat, but again, having it in there if the afternoon event's not for a few hours away from lunch. And then they really want to top up just with a quick bit of carbohydrate, maybe 15 to 30 minutes prior to that event. So your athlete should be sipping on some Gatorade, or maybe has a fruit leather or a small banana or something that just gives them a quick shot of glucose before they head out for their event. And then in the evening, basically most of the day can be what they would normally do, eating most of their overall calories during the day. If that event is before dinner, they definitely should have a pre-game snack, maybe an hour, 30 minutes out. Again, focuses on fluid and carbohydrates, so it's quickly digestible, and they'll be comfortable. And then after the event, depending on how long, they should have a very well-rounded dinner. And we'll talk about recovery here in just a few slides.
And Erin, just have a quick question from Peter. He said, "Is
Just in chat.
jam or yeah?" He said, "Is jam or peanut butter on a bagel okay prior to an event as a snack?"
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah. So with the peanut butter, again, there's a little bit of fat in peanut butter. It's not really that much unless there's someone like me that likes to put, an inch of peanut butter on a piece of toast. But yeah, so if your athlete tolerates peanut butter because of the fat and the little bit of protein that's in it, then that would be an absolutely perfect snack to have. The jam, again, just quick carbohydrates. So yeah, great snack for sure. As Natasha knows, there's always lots of peanut butter and jam sitting around the sports center for our athletes. Okay, so here, just a quick couple of examples. I mentioned a few things just a second ago, but a light snack. There's some examples there. Like Natasha said, you'll get this in PDF, so you'll have some good reference material for your athletes if they're looking for what kinds of things they should be eating. So that liquid meal replacement's great. There's your toast with jam, maybe some fruit juice. Again, looking at 100% fruit juice. I'm all about the whole fruit, but if we want to keep fiber low because we're just looking at a quick snack, then 100% fruit juice is a great option. Low fat muffin. If they can do homemade, that's even better because then you can add all kinds of good stuff in there. And then a full meal, maybe something like pancakes with a little bit of syrup. Again, this might not be something we're going to get our athletes to eat every single morning for breakfast, but this is going to give them a good quick carbohydrate and give them that fuel that they need to get out and do their event. So those are just some examples there. Okay. And certainly hydration, very, very key. I don't know if anyone has seen this color chart before. I always find it amusing when I do this presentation or presentations like these with athletes, and I think it's a little weird that I ask them if they check their pee, but depending on the relationship with your athletes' coaches, it's definitely not a bad question to ask them when they're starting with training, competition, whatever it is, is it something they check, or what color was it, are you hydrated, because it is a really individual thing. It's hard for dietitians to just say all athletes should drink 3 or 4 liters of water. It's really not quite that black or white. We certainly have some references and some guidelines, but for the most part, asking your athletes just to check that on the daily, especially before they're getting around competition, is a good way to know if they're going to stay hydrated or start that event hydrated. So we want to aim for that. Even 2 or 3 on the color chart, maybe even on the one. I'm not sure how white it shows up on your screens, but we don't want them having clear urine. I do get that question from athletes when I talk to them about that, like, oh, mine's clear, that's great. Well, if it's clear all day long, that actually could mean your athlete is a little bit overhydrated, and that is not necessarily problematic per se, but it could mean that their electrolyte balance could be a little bit off, which could impair performance slightly. So we do need to make sure that they have an appropriate level of hydration to sodium potassium level in their body to make all the muscles and everything work properly. So we don't want athletes, boasting that their pee is clear all the time. So it should just be sort of a lemonade or a light straw color. So that's what you should tell them to strive for throughout the day, leading into competition, leading into training. That's what they need to be looking for. So a couple cups, you could get them making sure they're drinking some water 1 to 2 hours out, and then have a quick top up 15 minutes before just to make sure that they're good and ready to go. But to give them enough time to eliminate anything unwanted. So they certainly don't want to be playing catch up leading up to an event, realizing that they haven't hydrated well the day or two before and then trying to golf back as much as they can because that's not going to be comfortable. So what can you do as a coach for hydration? I think this is a really a good, uh, it's something that coaches can definitely help with. I think nutrition on the front is, if coaches are educated, like as you all will be after tonight, certainly how to help your athletes and give them some information. But hydration, you can really definitely play a really important role. So reminding them of the consequences of dehydration on performance. Those would be things like risk for cramping, risk for serious injury if they are dehydrated, fatigue, fainting. If you're training in hot weather, they could get heat stroke, things like that. So really reminding your um, athletes that it's really important to be hydrated because it could definitely impair their performance. And the biggest one really, I guess, would be injury because then they're going to be out of play for a while, and then you have to work at building that back up. So that's an unfortunate place to be for coach and athlete. Um, Incorporate drink opportunities during training. So as a coach, you have that ability to allow that time in their schedule when they're doing training to promote hydration and even to promote snacking as well, depending on how long their training is going. So that's something that you can definitely have a direct hand in. I think that's great. Provide fluid for your athletes. So whether it's just you have bottles of water, or if you have one of those big old yellow or what are they, yellow or orange tubs that you can fill with a sports drink. You can even do homemade sports drinks, which would be a bit cheaper. Providing your athletes with stuff like that or juices is a great way to help promote their hydration. And just keeping an eye at making sure that they're taking advantage of either the breaks you've incorporated or the breaks that they have because they have a second after the end of a set or they have a minute in the middle of their competition. So making sure they have a few gulps about every 15 to 20 minutes. So it doesn't need to be sitting and taking a lot. It just needs to be a quick mouthful every 15, 20 minutes. You can also, oh, sorry, that's okay. You can also determine their individual fluid losses. That's something that needs to be done through a team approach. So sports dietitians or having some physiologists with our instruments to go in and we can assess athletes' individual fluid losses. So we can make a very specific individual rehydration plan for athletes. That's something that can be done if you have access to those services. Excuse me. And then helping them prepare that replacement plan for training competition. It's really important. And some athletes might really, really like to know exactly if I do this amount of exercise in this type of temperature, I lose this much fluid, and I need to know that I need to be drinking 1 cup or one whole bottle every 2 hours. So sometimes those numbers for certain athletes can be really helpful and make sure that they're optimally hydrated. Perfect. So we talked about pre. What are they going to be doing during? Again, going to depend on what the event is. So if it's not a long event, whether it's training or a competition, but it's less than 45 minutes, they might not need carbohydrates at all, and water is going to be sufficient because they just need to make sure they're hydrating. So they don't actually need an energy top up. They just want to make sure that they're hydrating. Unless it's really hot or unless your athlete is a really heavy sweater, then you may look at doing some sports drink just because of the electrolyte content in them. So that can be really helpful to replace that for those types of athletes. So there is a place for those in that environment. Again, we want to make sure it's easy digestible carbohydrates. So again, things that they've tried, they know that they tolerate them well. High intensity exercise that's continuous, you might need a small amount of carbohydrate, including mouth rinsing. We've actually found out that carbohydrate, just doing a bit of mouth rinsing, that contact with the mouth and the oral cavity can stimulate parts of the brain and the central nervous system to enhance perceptions of well-being, and that can actually increase how much work that your athlete will put out. So it's sort of a trick to the brain without even really swallowing the carbohydrate. So just mouth rinsing can help. Endurance athletes, we want to make sure that they have 30 to 60 grams per hour. So that fruit source bar that you see, that letter on the screen, has about 32 grams. So if your athlete is working for a couple hours, whether that's their long event or it's in training, you want to make sure that they have one of those or something like that every hour that they're working. Now, what do we want to do for recovery? We want to make sure that they, again, are looking at carbohydrates. We've just completely depleted your athlete's energy stores, their glycogen stores, but we've also broken down some muscle tissue as well, especially if we're in long events or we're in training. So we need to make sure they have carbs and protein. The ratio is actually much greater of carbohydrates to protein than you might think as a coach, or I know as athletes, they are very surprised by this. So again, there's some numbers there, but all in all, just know that your athlete, when they're done their training or when they're done their event, they need to make sure that they're having a good source of carbohydrate. Again, we've had lots of examples. A bit of protein, dairy. If your athletes consume dairy, is going to be your best bet because of the whey content, and that's really what they want to be looking at for speedy muscle recovery and replacement for the next activity. And then making sure that they're rehydrating for that next event or that next training session. It's going to be really important.
So, Erin, you have another question.
Yeah,
Just
perfect. I
what
was
can
taking
be,
a look, actually.
yeah, so Gazelle asks, what can be used to replace milk due to allergy?
Perfect. And that's so for as lactose is what I assume that you mean. So your milk alternatives like almond and all those other alternatives will be okay. Your best one for that would actually be soy because of the amount of protein. I know almond milk. I have air quotations around milk for almond, but they a lot of athletes do enjoy that, but it's pretty low on the nutrition scale, to be honest. So I would say soy milk would be your best bet if they don't have a soy allergy. So to substitute for milk. Um, Depending on the athlete and how severe that allergy is, you may get away with like very, very thick Greek yogurt because the lactose content is quite low. So some athletes, again, that would be something your athlete would have to try depending on the severity of the allergy, but they may get away with some really, really thick Greek yogurt like skyr. I know is really low in lactose, but I would say soy would be your best one if we are looking for whey or I guess a higher, not whey, but a higher protein recovery. I mean, they certainly could have animal proteins as well. Like they could munch on they could have a piece of chicken or anything like that for recovery as well. Certainly, yeah. Great question. Thank you. Is it Giselle? Gazelle? Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Um, and a recovery, again, depending on timing of the events. If they're back to back, you might not have this time, but if you have time in between, recovery actually is in 2 stages technically. We want to make sure our athletes are having a quick snack right after their event. So within 30 minutes is really ideal because at this point the body's got all kinds of enzymes and all kinds of things happening that when you actually eat those carbohydrates and eat the protein, the body's going to respond very quickly and do all the repair that we want to within that time period. And then within a couple hours after that, then your athlete can have a bit more of a full meal, or it might just be another snack. So it needs to be at least the amount of food they would have had directly after the event. So if they don't have anything going on a few hours after, they can have a full meal. If they just need to have a quick top up, then again, they just have another light snack. But again, there's some examples of some food. I'll let you flip through that on your own time. This next slide is I really like this. Excuse me. I really like this. Yeah, perfect. I really like this statement. I think it's really great. And it says, you can read it, but a proper diet cannot make an average athlete elite, but a poor diet can make an elite athlete average. I know I had some questions. I have a friend of mine that coaches volleyball, and she was wondering sort of what happens when our athletes eat, um, and I don't know, for the not the greatest throughout the training season. They don't think it's a big deal, but they eat really great when they're on the road, when we're leading competition, and they eat really stellar. But what I try to get athletes to understand is that, like, you can eat really well, and they might not make you, give you Olympic gold every single time. But when you don't eat well, it really will hurt your performance. And they might not see that on the day. But again, I kind of go back to that analogy of building that house. So we want to make sure that that foundation is really strong. It's concrete. We're not going to build this house on rotten wood, even though they don't see it. You don't see that wood might be rotten and it might not fall down right away, but eventually that's going to deteriorate over time. And that's kind of what nutrition, I feel, is like with athletes in training. So they're still going to be able to perform, very likely. I haven't seen any athletes that don't eat well through training and don't go to competition and at least do something. But the reality of them doing as well as they could or should, and as much work as the coaches try to get them to put in, is just not there if they don't have that proper foundation throughout the whole training season. So athletes really need to understand that you'll probably be able to do the work, but you will likely see things like more general fatigue. So they're going to be more tired coming into training, finishing training. They're going to find the work harder. They might have more injuries than other athletes that have a more solid or a well-rounded nutrition plan in place. Therefore, they have longer time to get back into play. They're never really ahead of where they need to be. They're not going to be benefiting as much from the training in terms of building as much lean mass or being as fast as they should. So their endurance performance might suffer. They're not really building from week to week. They're just staying at the same. They're plateauing. Those glycogen stores will just be decreased. There could be increased inflammation, which they may or may not even be aware of, but that will impact their performance when it comes to competition time. So that could be inflammation in the joints. It could be not having strong mental health because they're not having the proper nutrition. So all of those things that an athlete, especially in sort of that adolescent teenager phase, might not think are important because they just don't see that. They might not see that consequence on a day-to-day basis in training. It definitely can lead up to impaired performance in a competition setting. So it's really important to have those athletes understand how great that is. The next slide, I had that on my first webinar. Just sort of a quick stat again, it just comes back to that quality. The quality matters. So we know that this population of athletes, so especially teenagers, they eat out quite a bit. They drink a lot more sugary drinks. They're not getting enough fruits and vegetables, and that really leads to an increased risk for a lot of chronic disease. And it's not uncommon for athletes to be falling into this pattern as well. Maybe not as frequent as their non-athletic counterparts, but getting them to understand that this is going to affect their ability to perform more seriously is I think really important. So I know that definitely as coaches, you probably, this is a picture that you see your athlete. You can sort of picture your athlete looking, especially when you're maybe traveling with them and you see them looking at a menu, like where do I go here? Which should I choose? Or what they're doing, before after training. You might hear of what they're eating. It's definitely a struggle, I think, for this population and everyone at some point in time, I'm sure. But like I said before, it's good that if our coaches can have a general understanding about nutrition and its importance to try to help our athletes make the best choices if you have the opportunity. And again, a slide that I had in the first presentation. So those are some of the consequences of this would be consequences for being deficient in overall energy, overall calories. But I think I made the point enough about the quality certainly can affect us as well. So if we're not eating the right kinds of fats, or your athletes are having excess sodium because they're eating fast food, they're hitting Subway and they're not choosing the right things on their way at a training or before a competition, they want to go to McDonald's or whatever it might be. Simple carbohydrates are not really giving the whole much. We start to see these things kind of build up over time. Irritability, they might be not sleeping well, get impaired immunity, injury risk is high. So if you have athletes that are constantly being injured, they have recurring injuries, they can't really seem to get well. Nutrition can often have a big play in that. So just being aware of those things, I think, is important. And then this next slide was it sort of in reference to the previous one in that 3,400 calories, which could be, an average for a certain athlete, can be made up with a whole lot of good nutritious food in the run of the day, or it can look as simple as a bowl of cereals in the morning, a Happy Meal for lunch, and a personal size frozen pizza. That in itself is 3,400 calories. So it's not just about how much your athletes are eating every day, because they certainly need enough energy. But if we're not getting that right kind of energy, that's where we're going to see that performance impairment over time. So maybe not immediately, but certainly over time. I'm going to try to quickly get through travel nutrition. Was there anyone that was really absolutely dead set on supplements? Just want to know, because I'll try to, if there's any maybe questions about supplements, type them in there. And if I don't get to my slides, I might be able to answer a couple of questions if there was anything from the coaches. Sometimes I know that comes up on what their athletes are doing that way. But I'll quickly go through eating on the road. I like this. I like this picture because traveling is not an excuse for unhealthy choices. It's not. I hear it all the time from athletes, like, well, but we go here and there's not as much around, and and my response is, it's certainly challenging. It's definitely challenging, but it's not an excuse, because we just have to talk about planning ahead. So, what are some of the challenges of travel? A few of them here. Managing those regular eating patterns. So your athlete's been great. They've been starting to set up on a good plan. How do they maintain that? How do they deal with the time zone changes? So how do they minimize jet lag if you're traveling from here to Europe, or if you're doing any long distance travel? Activities that get scheduled in, it might conflict with when to eat. Knowing what foods are the best choices, period. Packing safe foods. So we'll talk about athletes packing their own foods. It's really important. Making sure that they're avoiding illness. So traveling is really hard on the body, especially if we're doing any sort of in-flight transit. And we all know airplanes are sort of germ-infested cabins. So keeping your athletes healthy when they're flying is really important. Buffet meals, so much choice sometimes. What do athletes do? How do they minimize any unwanted weight gain, or eating all kinds of new foods that they might like but shouldn't be eating leading into competition? Anything that's different. So if you're in a completely different place and the food is totally foreign to your athletes, how do we get around that? And then just the fact that eating is social. So we want to make sure that if they are relaxed in a comfortable environment, that's fantastic, but we don't want to see athletes overeating. So what are the biggest challenges faced by athletes while they are eating on the road? Sort of the three biggest ones that we find, and as coaches, you might be able to agree to this, but achieving their carb and protein requirements while reducing unhealthy fat intake. So when we're in a new place, or we're relying on fast food because that's what's around the hotel that they're staying in, how do we deal with that? Not getting vitamin and mineral requirements. We're going to more convenient types of foods, which are less nutritious, and then making sure they're adequately hydrated. And that's especially when we're doing any sort of long distance travel, whether it's in vehicle or on a plane. That can be dehydrating for athletes. So easiest probably to get them to use the plate method. So the next slide there. Great, thanks, Tasha.
And
so
Erin, maybe just before you get into the plate method, Caitlin does have a supplement question, and Chris has a comment. Can you see the chat?
Oh, I see.
So Caitlin just
has a question, and then Caitlin. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
BCAs. For athletes, are your athletes in this sort of age category, Caitlin? Because I don't know if BCAs, in general, we don't have a lot of evidence for supplements for those athletes under 18. And BCAs are sort of a hit or miss. Like the research is a bit, from the latest that I've been seeing and reading with other dietitians, they're sort of on the hit or miss scale. We do find them, they might have a place with athletes, if they really have a really great nutrition plan, but the evidence isn't overly strong for BCAAs at this point, I think they get really they get highly marketed, um, and definitely young adolescents get jump on the bandwagon with BCAAs for sure. They could have a place, but it's really, like I said, the evidence is not overly strong in their ability to help performance. And for this population, it wouldn't be something that I would be recommending. No. Hopefully that answers it. I know it's not black or white, but unfortunately, that's where we are. I think with the BCAA evidence to date. And for Chris, um, my advice and initially was that not going to not be using them for those under 18, and I would still stick with that for the most part if they have a good nutrition plan. But funny enough, the one thing I was going to mention was the creatine. So if we get there, I can hit on that really quickly. But for the most part, your athletes, if they have a nutrition plan, shouldn't need supplements, and they certainly shouldn't need anything really complicated. So if they want to look into a protein powder, I can certainly, maybe I'll quickly get to a slide on how they can do that safely, but for the most part, they should be looking at whole foods, yeah. Um, so a plate method, looking at, looking at, depending on how far away they are from training or where they are in their competition schedule, how much they need for carbohydrates so they can assess it that way. And then how do they keep their energy up? So again, carbohydrates is definitely definitely the star of the show. I'm going to flip the next slide there, Natasha. Perfect. Keeping energy up. So whatever the route is, whether it's vehicle or plane, making sure your athletes are eating every few hours is really important. I think it can be great as a coach. And I have had coaches actually do this in the past after I've done presentations like this, and athletes got very excited about it. And if you can get them involved, it definitely gets them on board. So getting them to pack a team nutrition kit. So it's definitely easier if you're, I think, traveling by car or bus or whatever, but get them all involved. Okay, we're gonna get healthy snacks for the road, making sure everyone is meeting their energy needs, or that you're making sure athletes are eating well. Get them all involved with choices that they want to either contribute, bring from home, or things that if the coach has the means to supply some things, or if parents want to bake some stuff, get them involved with what they can pack in this nutrition kit to make sure that they're all eating really well on the road. So these are a few of the non-food items, but that you might need for on the road or in the hotel. And then, sorry, a couple slides. I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit here, Natasha. Sorry if I messed you up. We're just gonna go to travel food ideas real quick. And the graphic, one more back. Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I know since we're running out of time, I'm kind of flipping ahead here, but just quickly, some foods that are really good to pack. If you can think about non-perishables, they generally they're going to pack a lot easier unless you're able to bring a cooler, and that's great if you can. Then you have a whole other array of foods that you can pack, but high fiber cereals, crackers, those little mini tuna cans are great. Those are really portable, high protein fruit and trail mix, pitas, energy bars, cereal bars, roasted chickpeas, so cheese strings, all those kind of things are really good quality foods that you could pack for your athletes. We'll continue on. Just look at what your athletes are choosing when they eat out. So we want to make sure that they're choosing wisely. If you see any of them reaching for nutritional information or asking, that's fantastic. If not, maybe we can educate them on what they need to look out for. So they want to keep saturated fats, trans fats, any excess sodium, and added sugars to a minimum. Those are, I don't want to categorize sort of best and worst, but if they can avoid foods that are giving them those nutrients, and that would be the best thing for them so that they're fueled properly for competition. And we want to make sure they are having things like fiber, protein, or healthy fats, vitamin C, calcium, iron when they're eating away. We don't want to see them getting the upsizing, getting all the extras in their meals, choosing beverages. So get them drinking water or fruit juice. There's really nothing else that they really need when they're sort of fueling in between. That should be sufficient. Milk would also be fantastic, but keeping the energy drinks and the pop to a minimum. None of those things are going to give them anything nutritious for competition. Grilled and baked over fried food, so staying away from the deep fried things as best they can. And even watching the salads. So salads can be tricky. We kind of generalize them that they're all, going to be healthier, but looking at the nutritional information on some of them with certain restaurants is important, because they actually can be full of saturated fats and excess sodium, which we want our athletes to kind of steer away from, especially when we're getting into competition. And the next couple slides, I think, are good examples of a few things that your athletes could look for eating on the road, or things you may be able to accommodate them with somehow. So breakfast and lunch there, I won't go through them, but if you're able to look at the PDF, that'd be great. Yeah, perfect. So what coaches can do, like I said, the best thing you can do is plan ahead. So get your athletes involved. Tell them that you're going to do this. Parents can get involved too. That's fantastic. Check and see if there will be any food available during travel. If not, pack that nutrition kit. Like I said, it's a great idea. No baggage limits if you are flying in order to pack a nutrition kit. So your athletes should know this on their own so that they can pack things. I've definitely talked to athletes, and we've come up with a list of a dozen things that they were going to take because they were flying to Europe for a training camp, and some of the things that they knew they couldn't get over there, or things that they were comfortable eating in training and knew that they set well in their stomach. They had to make sure they had those. So it's really important that your athletes do that in case they are not able to access the things they need. Plan break stops. If you have the time, if you know your itinerary, really try to plan that so your athletes have time to rest, to get up and stretch, to hydrate. And then we want to talk to anyone involved in competitions ahead of time, if you can, to see what foods will be available at the accommodation. So hotels with continental breakfasts, some can be good, some are not so great, as I'm sure you've seen as coaches with your teams. And if you can, make arrangements for special meals in advance. That can be really helpful. That might be more accommodating for bigger events. Or just call and know where you're going and look at the restaurants or the food that's around, so that you can be aware of where your athletes are able to go. So that's a big one. And I think, due to time, we will leave the sport food and supplement. So I did have a couple of questions there. We've answered them. If there was anyone else that had a last minute question about it, I would certainly take it, but I think we'll have to definitely leave that for another time.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Erin. And yeah, so coaches online, so if you guys have any questions on this area or anything else Erin covered, we'll stay online and let's answer those. And then, there's lots of different areas, Erin, that you could certainly speak on that we can deep dive into in another webinar. So I just don't feel we're short on time because of that. You guys, we can have access to Erin another time. As well. So I just sent out a little note to everyone with the PDF slides. You can go through them in your own time. And then I also just asked if there are some subject areas around this that you would like a deeper dive or some more time in. Let us know and we can rebook Erin for that deeper dive. Yeah. So thanks so much, Erin. That was awesome. And really helpful. I mean, even I've been traveling on the road with athletes for years, and it's always a good reminder, and I love some of the images that you went through, so thank you very much. For those coaches online, just as a really quick update, our next full-on webinar, like webinar only, is still being scheduled because I have two really great speakers. Ann Dodge and Mark Smith are going to be doing a session on sort of how to balance life and a family while coaching. So they've got some great stuff planned. They're just trying to nail down a date. They're Mark Smith especially is out of the country a lot at this time of year. So they're going to be doing one in November, but we're just in early November, late October, early November, but we're trying to nail down the date. If any of you have attended any of our live streaming, we have October 24th is upcoming with Leo Thornley, and he's doing planning for coaches. It'll be a really great session, and that'll be live streamed at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. And then November 20th, we have one that people are very excited about, which is anxiety reduction techniques for coaches and athletes, as well as discussion around social media and electronic use with teenage athletes. And that is with Danielle Poulos on November 20th. Again, that'll be one that'll be live streamed from Halifax, so it'll be 7 p.m. Atlantic time that night. So those are both in the locker, and that's kind of what's coming up next. And then just to finish off, I do have one question to make sure I get you guys all in the locker. Mandy, if you don't mind sharing with me either in the chat or if you have your volume working, just your last name is all I need, and then I'll be able to find everyone in the locker and get you guys your credits. And I'll just finish saying thank you very much for sticking with us tonight and for joining us. And again, we'll share the recording on YouTube as soon as we can pull it offline and get it uploaded. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.